The AMD Radeon RX 7600 is a powerful and compact graphics card that can run most games at high settings and resolutions. It is based on the RDNA 3 architecture, which is the latest generation of AMD's graphics technology. The RX 7600 features a Navi 33XL GPU, which has 2048 cores, 128 texture mapping units, and 64 ROPs. It also has 32 ray tracing acceleration cores, which enable realistic lighting and shadows in games that support ray tracing. The RX 7600 has 8 GB of GDDR6 memory, which is fast and efficient. It uses a 128-bit memory bus and has a bandwidth of 288 GB per second. The RX 7600 also has 32 MB of Infinity Cache, which is a high-speed cache that reduces memory latency and power consumption. The RX 7600 has a base clock of 1720 MHz and a boost clock of 2655 MHz. It has a TDP of 120W and requires a single 8-pin power connector. The RX 7600 is designed to fit in small form factor cases, as it has a dual slot design and a length of about 20 centimeters. It has no display outputs, as it is meant to be used with an external monitor or a VR headset. The RX 7600 can handle most games at high settings and resolutions, such as 1080p or 1440p. It can also run some games at 4K, but with lower settings or frame rates. The RX 7600 supports DirectX 12 Ultimate, Vulkan, OpenGL, and OpenCL. It also supports AMD's features such as FidelityFX Super Resolution, Smart Access Memory, Radeon Boost, Radeon Anti-Lag, Radeon Image Sharpening, and FreeSync. The RX 7600 is expected to launch on May 25, 2023, and have a price of around $1. It will compete with NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 4060 Ti and RTX 4060, which are also mid-range graphics cards with ray tracing capabilities. The RX 7600 will offer a great balance of performance, power efficiency, and affordability for gamers who want to upgrade their PC or build a new one. In this section, I will talk about how the reference design of the RX 7600 features a single fan cooler and a short PCB that makes it easy to fit in small form factor cases. The RX 7600 is AMD's upcoming entry-level graphics card based on the Navi 33XL GPU, which is rumored to use a different process node than the Navi 31 die that powers the high-end Radeon RX 7900 XTX and Radeon RX 7900 XT. The RX 7600 is expected to launch on May 25th at Computex according to leaked renders from VideoCard. AMD has produced a reference design for the RX 7600, which they call the MBA, made by AMD Design. This design is very compact and simple, with a black shroud, 0 RGB lighting, and a matching backplate. The graphics card has 2 cooling fans that blow air over a heatsink that covers the entire PCB. The PCB itself is very short, measuring less than 21 centimeters in length. This is almost as compact as a mini iX GPU, which is typically around 17 centimeters long. The short PCB and the dual-slot design make the RX 7600 reference card ideal for small form factor cases, which have limited space and airflow. The graphics card also has a single 8-pin power connector, which means it does not consume a lot of power and does not require a large PSU. The video outputs include 3 DisplayPort 2.1 ports and 1 HDMI 2.1 port, which offer plenty of connectivity options for modern monitors. The RX 7600 reference design is not only compact but also powerful enough for 1080p gaming. The graphics card is rumored to have 2048 stream processors and 8 GB of GDDR6 memory with a 128-bit memory interface. It also supports PCIe 4.0 x 16, although it only uses x8 lanes electrically. The RX 7600 will benefit from AMD's RDNA 3 architecture, which offers improved performance and efficiency over the previous generation. The RX 7600 reference design is a great example of how AMD can deliver a small but mighty graphics card for budget-conscious gamers who want to build a compact gaming PC. The RX 7600 will compete with NVIDIA's GeForce RTX 4060 and RTX 4060 Ti, which are also expected to launch soon. The pricing and availability of the RX 7600 are still unknown, but we will find out more details at Computex how I built a gaming PC with the RX 7600 in a coffin-sized case. You might be wondering how I managed to build a gaming PC with the AMD Radeon RX 7600 in a coffin-sized case. Well, it wasn't easy, but it was definitely worth it. In this video, I'll show you how I did it, and what are the challenges, benefits, and drawbacks of such a setup. First of all, let me introduce you to the RX. This is AMD's latest mid-range GPU, based on the RDNA 3 architecture. It has 32 compute units, 8 GB of GDDR6 memory, and 32 MB of Infinity cache. It's expected to launch by the end of May 2023 at around $329. It's designed to deliver excellent 1080p gaming performance and compete with NVIDIA's RTX 4060. Now, you might be thinking that this is a pretty powerful card for such a small case. And you're right. The RX 7600 is not a low-power GPU. It has a TDP of around 130W, which means it needs a decent cooling system and a reliable power supply. That's where the challenge begins. The case I used for this build is the Silverstone ML08BH. This is a mini IDX case that measures only 380 by 87 by 370 millimeters, 14.96 by 3.43 by 14.57 inches. It has a volume of only 14 liters, which is about the size of a coffin for a small animal. It's one of the smallest cases that can fit a full-length graphics card, but it also has some limitations. The main limitation is the CPU cooler height. The case only supports coolers up to 58 millimeters, 2.28 inches, tall, which rules out most air coolers and liquid coolers. The only option I had was to use a low-profile cooler like the Noctua NHL9i. This cooler is very quiet and efficient, but it also has a low cooling capacity of only 65W. That means I had to choose a CPU that doesn't generate too much heat. The CPU I chose for this build is the Intel Core i5-11400F. This is a 6-core, 12-thread processor that runs at up to 4.4 GHz. It has a TDP of 65W, which matches the cooler's capacity. It also has no integrated graphics, which means it's cheaper and consumes less power than other models. It's a great CPU for gaming, especially at 1080p. The motherboard I used for this build is the Osrock B560M IEX/AC. This is a mini IEX board that supports the latest Intel 11th Gen processors. It has 2 DDR4 memory slots, 1 PCIe x 16 slot for SATA ports, 1 M.2 slot, Wi-Fi and Bluetooth connectivity, and plenty of USB ports. It's a compact and feature-rich board that fits perfectly in the case. The memory I used for this build is the Corsair Vengeance LPX 16 GB, 2 by 8 GB, DDR4-3200CL. This is a low-profile memory kit that runs at high speed and low latency. It's compatible with the motherboard and the CPU, and it provides enough capacity and bandwidth for gaming and multitasking. The storage I used for this build is the Samsung 970 EVO Plus 1TB NVMe SSD. This is one of the fastest SSDs on the market, with read and write speeds of up to 3,500 megabytes per second and 3,300 megabytes per second respectively. It plugs into the M.2 slot on the motherboard, and it offers plenty of space for games and applications. The power supply I used for this build is the Corsair SF600 Platinum. This is a small form factor, SFX, power supply that delivers 600 W of power with an efficiency rating of 80+ Platinum. It has modular cables, which makes cable management easier in such a tight space. It also has a 0 RPM fan mode, which means it's silent at low loads. And finally, the graphics card I used for this build is the Sapphire Radeon RX 7600 Pulse. This is one of the first models of the RX 7600 to hit the market, and it looks amazing. It has a dual fan cooler with RGB lighting, a metal backplate, and an overclocked core clock of up to 1845 MHz. It measures only 240 by 120 by 42 millimeters, 9.45 by 4.72 by 1.65 inches, which fits snugly in the case. So, how did I put all these components together in such a small case? Well, it took some patience and some creativity. The first step was to install the motherboard standoffs and screws in the case. Then I installed the CPU cooler on the CPU and mounted it on the motherboard. Next, I installed the memory modules in their slots and plugged in the power cables for the CPU and motherboard. The next step was to install the SSD in its slot on the motherboard and secure it with a screw. Then I installed the power supply in its bracket and attached it to the case with 4 screws. The next step was to install the graphics card in its slot on the motherboard and secure it with 2 screws. Then I plugged in the power cable for the graphics card and routed it through the side panel. The final step was to install the Wi-Fi antennas on the back of the motherboard and connect them to their ports on the board. And that's it! The PC was ready to boot up and install Windows. But before I show you how it performs in games, let me tell you about some of the benefits and drawbacks of this setup. The main benefit of this setup is obviously its size. This PC is so small that you can easily carry it around or fit it in any space. You can use it as a portable gaming machine or as a living room PC connected to your TV. Another benefit of this setup is its performance. The RX 7600 is a powerful GPU that can handle most games at high settings at 1080p resolution with smooth frame rates. The i5-11400F is also a capable CPU that can keep up with the GPU without bottlenecking or overheating. The SSD provides fast loading times and responsiveness, while the memory provides enough capacity and speed for multitasking. A third benefit of this setup is its aesthetics. The case has a sleek black design with mesh panels for airflow. The graphics card has RGB lighting that adds some flair to the build. The components are neatly arranged inside the case with minimal cable clutter. However, this setup also has some drawbacks that you should be aware of. The main drawback of this setup is its cooling potential. The case has limited space for fans and radiators, which means there's not much room for overclocking or upgrading. The CPU cooler can barely handle the CPU at stock speeds, and there's no option to replace it with something better. The graphics card cooler can keep the GPU cool enough, but it also generates some noise under load. The power supply fan can also get loud when the system draws more power. Overall, this setup can get quite hot and noisy when gaming, which might affect your comfort and enjoyment. Another drawback of this setup is its upgradability. The case has no room for additional drives, so you're stuck with whatever storage you have. The motherboard has no extra slots or ports, so you can't add more memory or devices. The power supply has limited wattage, so you can't upgrade to more powerful components without replacing it. Basically, this setup is not very future-proof, and you might need to replace the whole system sooner than later. A third drawback of this setup is its cost. While the RX 7600 itself might be affordable, the other components are not cheap. The case, the power supply, the SSD, and even the low-profile cooler are all premium products that come with premium prices. You might end up spending more money on this setup than on a larger PC with similar performance. So is this setup worth it? Well, that depends on your preferences and needs. If you value portability, performance, and aesthetics over cooling, upgradability, and cost, then this setup might be perfect for you. But if you prefer more flexibility, durability, and value over size, speed, and looks, then this setup might not be ideal for you. In any case, I hope you enjoyed this video and learned something new. If you did, please leave a like, comment, and subscribe to my channel for more content like this. Thank you for watching, and see you next time.